بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The first hadith which we are going to look at is a hadith which can be found in Sunan Abu Dawood, narrated by Ibn Abbas radhiyallahu anhu, and the words of the hadith are Anna Nabiyya sallallahu alayhi wa sallam naha an tu'amil mutabari'ain ay yu'kala. And the translation of this hadith is that the Prophet of Allah, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, has prohibited from accepting the invitation of such a person, al-mutabari'ain, who is inviting with the intention to compete with others, with the intention of fakhr, with the intention of riyah, with the intention of pride and arrogance. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited accepting the da'wat and the invitation of such people. Now, the topic which we are looking at is with regards to walima, and a couple of weeks ago I mentioned the emphasized nature of walima in Islam, and I also touched on other aspects of walima in terms of if there are unlawful and haram things going on in the walima, then it is impermissible for you to accept such an invitation. Thereafterwards, the author of this book, he then goes on to talk about and touch on da'wats and invitations in general. So if a person was to invite you, so should you accept that invitation or not? So again, we looked at a couple of weeks ago that da'wats or invitations besides walima, it is desirable to accept, mustahab to accept. If for some reason you say that you don't want to accept it, or for some reason you decline, then it is not considered to be a sin, it's not considered to be disliked. Now, this hadith which I've touched on is a very, very important hadith, because sometimes what happens is that people, they invite you to come to their house for food, for khana, for pina, for dawat, but their intention isn't to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their intention isn't to get the reward and thawab of diyafat and mehman nawazi, but their intention is to show people that they are very, very rich, or they are very, very pious, or their intention, as the hadith mentions here, riya'an wa fakhran. Their intention is riya. Now, what does riya mean? Riya is an Arabic word which in English means show off. That you're doing certain things, certain actions, whether it's commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not with the intention to please Allah or to please Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but your intention is riya. Riya, what does riya mean? Riya means that your intention is to please someone else. Your intention is someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So basically, you giving this nice lavish banquet and feast, but your intention isn't to get the reward of diyafat and mehman nawazi. Your intention is that you want people to say, oh mashallah, Abdul Rahman is a very, very generous person, Abdul Rahman is very, very kind, Abdul Rahman is very, very rich, he's giving dawat and invitation for hundreds and hundreds of people. Your intention is that. Now, what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying from this hadith is that if there is a host, a mezban, who is giving such an invitation, he is inviting people, but his intention isn't to get the reward or thawab of diyafat and mehman nawazi, but his intention is fame, fakhr, riyah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying to the people that you should not accept such an invitation and such a da'wat. Now, the reason why, as I explained, is that riyah or show off is something which is very, very dangerous. It's what we call the razails of the heart, vile characteristics of the heart. And that's why scholars have said that riya is another category of shirk. It's shirk khafi. It's the discrete type of shirk. There's two types of shirk. One is called shirk jali, which is the clear and the apparent. And examples of that is if a person other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's worshipping an idol, he's worshipping something else. So that is a clear and an apparent type of shirk. Then you've got shirk khafi, which is the discrete type of shirk, where a person doesn't know that he is committing shirk. And that's why scholars have said that this is the most dangerous. An example of the shirk khafi is where basically you're doing actions or a'mals for someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is shirk khafi. And as mentioned in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that on the day of judgment, if you did a a'mal for someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell you in the hereafter that don't come to me for your reward or for your thawab. Go to that person who you prayed namaz for. Go to that person who you fasted for. Go to that person who you gave sadaqah and charity for, and see whether that person can give you the reward or the thawab. And zahir here that person would not be able to do that, because only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give reward, can give thawab, and that person would be stuck in the hereafter, which in other words, that person would be doomed and he'll be destined to go to the fire of hell. Why? Because all the a'mals which he did in this dunya, in this world, was for someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what this particular invitation, because Diyafat Mehman Nawaz is something which is good, but his intention wasn't for Allah. His intention was to please others, so that people can say, wah, mashallah, this person is very, very rich, very, very generous, very, very kind. His intention was for worldly purposes and for worldly reasons. That's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that such people's da'wats, such people's invitations, you should not accept. The second hadith which we are going to look at is a hadith from Sunan al-Bayhaqi, narrated by Imran bin Hussein radhiyallahu anhu. And he narrates, Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam an ijabati tu'amil fasikin. And the translation of this hadith is that the Prophet of Allah, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has prohibited from accepting the invitation of a fasik and an open sinner and a transgressor. Now this hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, in a nutshell, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that it is impermissible, it is severely disliked, it is makruh, it is detestable to accept the invitation, the da'wat of those people who are open sinners, those people who are transgressors. Now what does a fasik mean? Fasik is someone who is openly committing sins. So like someone who sells alcohol, and he's openly selling alcohol, meaning that he's got a restaurant on the high street and you know that he's selling alcohol. You could see he's got the wines and the beer cans at the back, and you know he's selling alcohol. Or someone, say for example, is a gambler, and you know that he's a gambler. He goes to Ladbrokes, he goes to William Hills, he goes and he bets, and then he earns money. This is his profession, this is his occupation. Or someone who is doing a haram or an unlawful job, like say working in banks. Working in banks, financial transaction is a topic which we'll inshallah look at later. But in a nutshell, working in banks, in particular as a cashier, where you are witnessing interest transaction, that is something which is unlawful and haram. And then you're getting paid for that, then you're actually getting paid for something which is unlawful and haram. So just say someone is working in a bank, working in an insurance company, life insurance companies, and so on and so forth. So all these are haram and unlawful jobs. Or like someone is working in a restaurant, someone is running a restaurant. And as you know, in restaurants, most of the sales is actually from alcoholic sales. Even though like somebody may argue and say, well, no, they buy food and so on. If you were to compare it, most of the money which a customer will spend will be actually on alcohol. the food is actually, say, 40% of the total. So just an example, a man and a woman, they go to a restaurant to eat. So they probably spend, say, £20 on food, but £40 will be on alcohol, or £30 will be on alcohol, because alcohol, wines, they cost a lot. That's where the restaurants, that's where they make the most business. It's on alcohol, it's not on the food. Food is very, very cheap. The chicken they sell, the chicken they cook, the meat is actually very, very cheap. The naans they make is very cheap. Where they make the most money is actually selling the wines, because wine is very, very expensive. Alcohol is very, very expensive. So they make most of the money in that. So just say, for example, you've got someone who's doing an open sin, someone whose business is against the rulings and the guidelines of the Sharia. So therefore, if you were to accept his da'wat, if you were to accept his invitation, i.e., just to be more precise and clear, you're accepting invitation from someone whose income is haram. So when someone's income is haram, the food which he is buying, the meat, the chicken, that is also going to be haram and impermissible as well. And then you go to his house for da'wat and invitation. So what's going to happen to your iman? Your iman will slowly decrease. And this is something which is very, very important, that iman is a light, is a nur in your heart. Now if you do something unlawful and haram, that light and that nur goes down. It dims, it extinguishes. Similarly, if you're eating haram and unlawful food, then what happens? That nur of iman also goes away. And that's why we stress on the importance of eating halal. You know, HMC 100% halal. You know, that's why we have articles outside. The reason why we stress on the importance of 100% halal is because by eating haram, you know, it takes the barakah away, and you realize when the barakah goes away, it then becomes difficult for you to exert any effort in your ibadat and your worship. Sometimes you get brothers, they come to me and they say, well, Mufti Sahib, I'm finding it difficult to maintain my prayers. I'm finding it difficult to do my sunnahs. I find it difficult to pray fajr. I find it difficult to do tasbih after salah. I find it difficult to read one chapter of the Holy Quran a day or even a week. Now, do you know the answer to that? One of the main reasons is because what you're eating is dodgy. What you're eating is mashkook and doubtful. Because as I said, when you eat doubtful food, when you eat dodgy food, when you eat haram and lawful food, it takes away the nur of iman in your heart. And when that happens, you find it very, very difficult to do your a'mals and to do your ibadat, to do your worship, to be punctual on your salah, to be punctual on your sunans, your sunnah prayers, your nafal prayers, to be punctual on your recitation of the Holy Quran, to be punctual on your tasbihat. It becomes very, very difficult. So this is why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that it is impermissible for a Muslim to accept the da'wat and the invitation of someone who is a fasik, someone who is a transgressor, someone whose income is totally haram and lawful. You should not accept his da'wat and invitation. It is mentioned, however, in the books of fiqh that if someone is earning halal and haram, like a mixture of both halal and haram, then in that situation, we will look at the majority. If the majority of his income is halal, then you can accept his invitation and da'wat. However, if the majority of his income is haram, then it will be impermissible for you to accept his da'wat and invitation. Because when you look at it, even like the jobs which we do, I think no one can say for sure, guarantee that 100% you're earning halal. Some can, you know, depending on the job, but actually there is a hadith which is coming up later that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that one of the signs of their judgment will be that interest, riba, will be so common, so armed, that even if you're not directly taking it, you're indirectly or inadvertently you're taking riba or interest. So even though we may be doing a halal job, but we can't say heart and heart that we are actually earning 100% halal. So therefore it will be difficult for us to act upon this hadith. So therefore the scholars have said that fair enough, if a person is earning more than 50% of his income is halal, then you can accept his invitation. If however more than 50% of his income is haram, then you should not accept that person's invitation. Now this takes me on to the next hadith here, again of Sunan al-Bayhaqi. Now this is a very, very important hadith. And The reason why I'll explain it in a second, because if everybody was to act upon this hadith, many of these doubts or shak which people have will inshallah will go away. Now the hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Bayhaqi, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, إِذَا دَخَلَ أَحَدُكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَخِيهِ الْمُسْلِمِ فَلْيَأْكُلْ مِنْ طَعَامِهِ, which means that if somebody or if any one of you entered the house of your Muslim brother, فَلْيَأْكُلْ مِنْ طَعَامِهِ, you should eat his food. فَلْيَأْكُلْ مِنْ طَعَامِهِ, you should eat his food. Now this is the main question. This is the main part of the hadith. وَلَا يَسْأَلْ, and you should not ask him. You should not ask him, where did you get the meat from? Where did you get this from? Where did you get that from? The next part of the hadith goes on to say, وَيَشْرَبْ مِنْ شَرَابِهِ وَلَا يَسْأَلْ, and you should also drink from whatever he has to offer you in terms of drinking. وَلَا يَسْأَلْ, and again you should not ask him where he got it from. Now the meaning of this hadith, when he says Muslim here means a pious person. So if you've gone or if you've been invited to a pious person's house, so just say an imam, a maulana, a scholar, then whatever food he offers you, you should eat it. And this is very important, you should not ask, where did you get it from? Now the reason why I'm saying this is that unfortunately many brothers nowadays, they take this 100% halal, they're so extreme in that even when they go to a maulana sahib's house or imam sahib's house, who's mashallah very very pious, who's muttaqi, who's God-fearing, they even start asking the maulana sahib, where do you get the meat from? You know, is it HMC? Is it from this store? Is it from that store? This hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us, wala yas'al, you should not ask. Now why? Obviously that maulana sahib, that imam sahib, his taqwa is probably more higher and more better than you. It is obvious that that maulana or that imam is not going to feed you haram. He's not going to be buying meat from Asda and then giving you the meat from Asda, haram meat from Asda, and giving it to you. He's not going to do that. That maulana sahib, his taqwa and his piety is probably same as yours or more better than yours. He intentionally is not going to feed you haram. So therefore it's going to be rude for you to go and ask the maulana sahib, where do you get the meat from? Let me see, where does it say it's HMC and so on. The reason why many people, you get some brothers, they're very very extreme in that. They go to imam's house, maulana sahib's houses, mufti sahib's houses, people who are very very pious and knowledgeable. They know all the ins and outs of what is halal, what is haram, and they start having a debate there. Very rudely they start having a debate with the maulana sahib and everyone. Maulana sahib, where did you get the meat from? Is it HMC? Is it non-HMC? Or this is haram, this is halal? And they make a big hoo-ha about it. However, the hidayat or the guidance given by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that, look, the maulana, he is mashallah very very pious, he is muttaqi, he has a lot of taqwa and piety more than you. You should not ask him, where did you get the food from? You know, it's very very rude. A lot of people don't know this, but it's very very rude to do that. Obviously, if say for example, if it's a Muslim brother, he may be a bit practicing, but he may not be fully practicing, and you got some doubts. Or it could be, say, a maulana sahib or an imam sahib, but you've got doubts that he may be getting meat from the wrong sources or from the wrong people or from people who are not 100% halal. Then in that situation you can investigate, but obviously with wisdom, in a nice way, with adab and with etiquette. Then you can ask the maulana sahib, where do you get the meat from, in a nice way, then that is okay. But when someone you know is pious, when you know that he himself will not be eating haram and lawful thing, then how on earth is he going to feed someone unlawful and haram? So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that in that situation you should not be rude and ask him, where do you get the meat from? And this is very very common. A few years ago in my walima, so again I invited some ulamas and some other brothers as well. So they were phoning me and say, oh Mufti Sahib, where are you going to get your meat from? Is it HMC and is it non-HMC and so on? So I actually explained this hadith to them, and I said to them that, look, you know, this is the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a hadith which you, being an alim, must have read and studied, that when someone is actually a pious person or someone who's an alim, someone who's knowledgeable, when he invites you, he's not going to be feeding you haram. You know, he's going to be 100% halal, it's going to be HMC, he's not going to be doing something haram and so on. So I explained this hadith, wala yas'al, that you should not ask where he's getting the meat from. If somebody, you've got some reasons or some basis to believe that the food which he's going to give is doubtful or mashkook, then in that situation with adab you can ask. But when that is not there, when you got no basis of any suspicion or any doubt, then you should not ask, and that is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The next chapter which we are going to look at in Arabic is called Babul Qasm. And in this chapter, we are going to look at this very famous ruling. And that is that if a man or a husband has more than one wife, so he's got 2 wives, 3 wives and so on, then what does the Sharia say with regards to doing insaf between them, doing adl and justice between them, doing barabari, sarabari, musawat between them? So all these ahkams and rulings will inshallah be looked at and touched on in this particular section and topic. Now before we look at this, I promised a few months back that when we do reach this section, we are going to touch on 2 things. The first thing which we're going to touch on, or the first topic which we're going to touch on, is with regards to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's marriage, or the number of wives Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had, and why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have so many wives. And the second issue which we'll leave until next week is with regards to the issue of polygamy in Islam, and why does the Sharia allow men to have more than one wife and not the other way around, women to have more than one husband. So what is the hikmah and the wisdom behind that? But this is something which inshallah we'll look at next week. But for this week's lesson, we need to touch on a very, very important issue, and that is the number of wives which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had, and why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have so many wives. Now firstly, the first point to be clarified here is that according to the majority of these scholars, according to the majority of the narrations, the muhaddithin, the mufassirin, they are of the view that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had 11 wives. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married 11 times, he had 11 wives. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, 9 of the 11 wives were alive and 2 had passed away. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did 11 marriages, did 11 nikah, he had 11 wives. But when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, 2 of the 11 had already passed away. And they were Hazrat Khadija radhiyallahu anha, who passed away during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, and another of the Azwaj Mutahharat, whose name was Zainab bint Khuzaymah radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Her nikah with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was for a few months, and then she fell ill and then she passed away. So out of the 11 wives, 2 of them passed away during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, and when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away at the age of 63, 9 of his wives were alive. Now some other scholars of the view that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had 13 wives, not 11 but 13. And the reason why they say that is because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had 2 slave girls. One was called Maria Kibtiya, and another slave girl whose name was Rayhana. And some scholars of the view that these 2 slave girls Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had, Maria Kibtiya and Rayhana, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam freed them, because you cannot marry your own slave girls. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam firstly freed them, and then he married them. And obviously, as you probably know, Maria Kibtiya was the slave girl who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a son whose name was Ibrahim. You probably know this from the books of Sirah. So that's why some scholars say that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had 13 wives, 13 including Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's slave girls, Maria Kibtiya and Rayhana. But as I said, the majority of the scholars of the view that no, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had 11 wives, and 2 of them passed away during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. Now this then takes me on to the next part which I want to explain is, Nauzubillah, many Muslims have started to question, why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have so many wives? Initially, it was you could say like a non-Muslim kind of propaganda that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam having so many wives. But slowly, sometimes you find Muslims asking the same questions. That why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have so many wives? And nauzubillah, thumma nauzubillah, some of them even going to say that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married all these wives because of desires, because of lust, and because of carnal reasoning and carnal passions. That's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam got married so many times. As I said, this was something which was started off as a propaganda, but you hear many Muslims say this. Muslims who apparently saying the kalima and they believe in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they will email you, they will phone you and they say, Mufti Sahib, what's this? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam having so many wives. What does Islam say about that? Why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam marry so many wives? And sometimes the way they put their question, you actually then doubting whether they still have iman or not. Because as you know that to make any derogatory comments about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about his life, about his uswa hasana, about his seerah, about his azwaj mutahharat, about his children, about the sahabas, very dangerous, can take a person out of the fold of Islam. So now the idea of today's talk is to just very briefly explain the wisdom or the hikmah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam marrying so many times. Now let's look at this argument which na'udzubillah many people put forward. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married or had 11 wives because of desires and lust. Now let me explain to you something. Someone who's got a lot of lust and desires, one of the qualities of that person, one of the attributes of that person is that he has money and he has time. When you look at these people like to call them womanizers, i.e. they go out clubbing and take a lot of girls home, and then the next day they do the exact same thing. When you look at it, they have a lot of money because they have a lot of money to go to clubs, take the girls with them, buy the girls gifts and so on. And also they have a lot of time. Every night they have time to go to clubs, they have time to go to these kind of intermingling places. Now when we look at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was washed with money? Did he have a lot of money? No. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lived a life of poverty even later on in Medina Munawwara, where there were various expeditions and lot of mane ghanimat and booty came into the hands of Muslims. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam still chose a life of poverty and faqr. That's why it's mentioned in the hadith that many days would pass in the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would suffice on two things. Al-aswadain, the two black things, and they are khajurs, date and water. So that's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was surviving on many weeks and months on end on dates and water. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't a rich person. And also number two, did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have a lot of time on his hands? No. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the most busiest person in the world. He was the busiest person on earth. Not only did he lead the 5 daily prayers and looked after the needy and the miskeen and looked after the azwaj mutahharat and the children and his daughters, but he would also have time for the other people who would come and ask Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's question. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would also teach, he would also preach, give da'wah, he would also prepare expeditions for battles and so on. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the most busiest person on earth. He didn't have time to fulfill his desires and lust and cravings and so on. So that argument which people put forward that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his number of marriages was for lust and desires, we can totally say that it wasn't for lust and desires. Then that leads to a question, and why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam marry so many times? Now just very quickly, there's a few reasons, a few wisdoms. Number one is ta'liman lil ummah, for the education of the ummah. Now what I mean by that is there are certain rulings which only women can know. about periods, haze, nifas, these kind of things. Now, if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just say for example, he didn't marry at all, then these questions about periods, about nifas, what women can do, can't do in their periods and in their nifas, no one would have known about it. Because these topics, a normal girl or a woman, she's not going to go and ask a strange man or a strange Imam Sahib, I've got this problem with my periods and haze, can you help me? No one's going to ask that. Who are they going to ask? Their husbands, because they're more comfortable with these kind of things. So the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married so many wives is that so many wives, like Hazrat Aisha anha, Hazrat Sauda anha, top of my head, had these kind of issues, or they could ask these kind of questions about periods, about cleanliness, about taharat, about jima, about intercourse to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where other women would be shy to ask Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is one wisdom of marrying so many wives, ta'liman lil ummah, to educate the Muslim ummah. Number 2, the second wisdom is that by marrying so many wives, each wife could then narrate and explain how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was at home with the wives. Hukukuz zawja, rights of the wives. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was in front of the Sahabas and companions, they saw another side of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was at home, the Sahabas couldn't narrate that, can they? Because they weren't with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at home. So who can narrate that? The wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's like, say for example, people who see me outside, they could narrate, oh, Imam Sahib, Mufti Sahib like this. But then at home, I could be totally different what I am here. So who knows that? My wives, my children, they know how I am at home. So exactly same with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Sahabas, they saw the external part of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was giving ta'aleem, when he was giving dars and lectures and bayans and preaching and da'wah. But how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was at home, the Sahabas couldn't narrate that. So who best to narrate it? The wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why in the hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, as Aisha anha narrates, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at home, he was like any ordinary person. I.e., he would mend his own shoes, he would sew his own clothes. As Aisha anha saying about Rasulullah, he would make his own food, he would make his own bread. So this is something which only the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam can narrate, not the Sahabas and the male companions. So that's another wisdom or a hikmah. Another wisdom of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam marrying so many times is to eliminate what we call ta'assub, racial or tribal discrimination. Because when you look at some of the wives Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married, he didn't just marry what we call Arabs or from the Quraysh clan. If you take the example of Safiya radhiyallahu anha, she was a Jewess, she was actually a Jew. And then she converted to Islam and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married her. And if you want to take the opinion of those scholars who say that Maria Qibtiyya radhiyallahu anha was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wife, Maria initially was from Egypt. So she's not Arab, she's not a Quraysh, she's not like a Sayyid, she was from Egypt. So what I'm trying to say is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married women from various clans, from various tribes, to get rid of something what we call ta'assub. Ta'assub meaning this kind of like tribal thing. Like Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Gujaratis, we just marry within ourselves and so on. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to eliminate that and wanted to show to everyone that no, the only thing which gathers all the Muslim together is Islam. It's not like being a Pakistani that just gathers all the Muslims together, or Gujaratis or Bangladeshis. What gathers Muslims together is Islam, is the kalima La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Another reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married so many times is to show the maqam and the status of a divorcee, a divorced woman. And unfortunately, this is the scenario which we have nowadays, that a woman who's been divorced, we na'udzubillah think of her to be like a aib, a defect. And that's why we see that young women who may have something happen, the first marriage didn't work out, that's like, obviously, marriage working out, that's down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So she's a young girl, but something happened, her husband divorced her, gave her talaq. Now, because she was divorced, or she's a divorcee, you'll see bichari, that woman would not find another husband or another man, for the rest of her life. So she's a young girl, 20-year-old, 19-year-old, and then because she's a divorcee, nobody wants to marry her, and then she remains single for the rest of the life. Now, what did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do practically? He showed the status and the maqam of divorcees, because as you know, many of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wives were either widows or divorcees. Only Hazrat Aisha anha was the exception to the rule. But besides that, the other wives Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married, take example of Hazrat Khadija anha, she was a widow of two marriages. Okay, so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married divorcees, married widows, to show their status and maqam, that when their husband passes away, it doesn't mean that, na'uzubillah, they kind of used goods or something, you can't get married to them, but instead you should get married to them so that their status and their maqam can be shown. And another reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is the last reason, obviously there's many reasons, but this is the last reason which I'm going to mention, why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married, or certain of his marriages was done, is to eradicate rusum, a riwaj. A rusum or riwaj means a cultural belief or a cultural notion. And in particular, the riwaj or the rusum or the cultural belief which was common in Arabia at that time was that a person's adopted son was considered to be your real son. Now remember, when you adopt a son, adopt a child, that child doesn't become your real child. So if it's a girl you've adopted, when she reaches the age of puberty, bulugh, maturity, you have to start doing parda and hijab from her. Why? Because your adopted sons or daughters, they're not your real sons. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam adopted a son in the name of Hazrat Zayd bin Haritha radhiyallahu anhu. Now, as I said, the Arabs, they would believe that your adopted son is actually your real son. Now, Hazrat Zayd bin Harith radhiyallahu anhu married a woman in the name of Zainab bint Jahsh radhiyallahu anha. Now, what happened was that their nikah, Zayd bin Harith radhiyallahu anhu's nikah with Zainab radhiyallahu anha, didn't work out. So, Zayd then divorced Zainab radhiyallahu anha. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then ordered Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you have to marry Zainab. Why? Is to get rid of this aqidah or this riwaj or this kind of cultural notion the Arabs had that your adopted son was considered to be your real son. As I mentioned before, that if Hazrat Zayd was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's real son, he wouldn't have been allowed to marry Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha, because as you know, you're not allowed to marry your daughter-in-law. Okay, even though your son may divorce his wife, never ever you're allowed to marry your daughter-in-law. So that's what the Arabs believed, that Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's real daughter-in-law. He wasn't, because they're adopted sons, but they believed that she was the real daughter-in-law. So Rasulullah sallallahu could never ever marry her. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that no, you have to marry her so that we can get rid of this aqidah and this belief and this riwaj which people had, that your adopted son are considered to be your real sons. So these are 5-6 wisdoms or hikmats which are mentioned why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married many times. But the main reason is obviously it was the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands something, then this is what iman is. Amanna saddaqna, that we believe and we verify. We don't ask questions. That's what Islam tasdeeq means, to verify. We don't ask questions, why is this, why is that? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to marry so many wives, we as the follower and tabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we should believe in that. But very, very importantly, we should not raise eyebrows or questions or make any comments why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married so many times. And unfortunately, it happens with the kids as well. Sometimes when you teach a kid about, oh, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had so many wives, they look, so many wives, 11 wives, they look at like that. So this is something which we need to target our youngsters, our youth, that not to have these kind of thoughts about why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married. Because the zamana which we live in, you explain to someone Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had 11 wives, na'uzubillah, straight away they'll think the bad things will come. They won't think about the good things. This is like the zamana which we're living in, unfortunately. Asharrul Qurud, the worst of all times we're living in, that you tell them something, they take the wrong meaning. They take the fahish and the behaya and the immoral meaning before they take the good meaning. So this is something which we need to get rid of from the mind of our youngsters. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act on what's been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Any questions?